Okay, so I quit my job almost a year ago today, and that's largely really what has happened since that I discussed in my opening monologue. But I want to get deeper into the reasons why I actually made this decision, because I think the reasons are important. And I think because the reason I want to do this as well is I want to make this the least bit about myself as possible. I want to make it broader. I want to make it systemic. I want to make it about you, because you are not here to listen to me complain about my problems. That's not what the show is about. So if I do that, I believe I'm detracting from why people watch me in the first place. And also because I believe there is a renaissance of some sorts and a revolution happening right now. And I want to give people reasons to question things. That was honestly, it's interesting because it was given to me by a actually really unimpressive professor, but this was the most applicable piece of advice I feel like I ever got in college, was to learn to question things. And I believe that that's been very good advice, especially with kind of the way that the world has gone, because if you don't question everything, if you just get a narrative spoon-fed to you over and over again, you're going to be so dependent on other people's information that you'll never seek information yourself, which is a major issue and a major problem. And so I want, and I think this is particularly true, by the way, with the resume that I have and the background that I have with all people, because I went to a big state school. I was encouraged that, this is it, this is the way, as the Mandalorian said, everything like that. And I think a lot of people were kind of told the same narrative. And I think a lot of people are discovering that that's not true. I was listening to a Tim Dillon episode this morning, actually on my way back from working out, and he was kind of saying, there's a reason why, and I want to do a segment about the psychopath that's going to get elected to be the new New York City mayor, but with Zoran Mamdani. I think the reason why he got elected is, and if you look at the demographic, this is actually hilarious. If you look at the demographic of, who voted for this guy, it's all college-educated white people who are making over six figures. Why? Because they believe they've been gypped. They believe that they bought into this narrative and they did what they quote unquote should have done. And now they're mad about it. And now they're like, going to No Kings protests and throwing stuff at police officers and things like that. So anyway, but I want to really get into the reasons why I left. And I think this can give a lot of people maybe some clarity, but also maybe some understanding and some empathy in terms of some things that they might be going through that I would think that they're probably in agreement with me. If they don't agree with necessarily all my positions, that's not what I'm talking about. But agreeing with the general ethos of everything is kind of what I want to hit home around. So the first reason why I left my corporate job is because of golden handcuffs. Golden handcuffs was probably the first reason that I left. I felt trapped in my own quote-unquote success, and I think a lot of people feel this way. Even like my boxing coach, Tyson Mendias, who was working at a government job out in California. He's making like a contracting job, I believe. He was just sitting in an office, basically making over six figures, and I think he said like one of his jobs was to go and like check the light bulbs of everything in the video or everything in the building, and then he could like leave by 12. And he's like, well, I could do this for the rest of my life, but I kind of want to move to Austin and start a boxing gym, which he did, and I'm glad that he did. So shout out to Archetype Boxing Club there. But I feel like this narrative of quote-unquote success by corporate standards, it's really just mediocrity at the end of the day. And I think the reason why I know this, and I think why a reason a lot of people feel this, but maybe not admit it, is that it's ultimately, when you're judging something, you have to have a comparable. You have to have a baseline. You have to have a metric in order to do this. And so when you're quote-unquote doing well, the right question you should ask in terms of that is, okay, doing well compared to what? I'm doing well in this job. Okay, compared to what? And that is the question that no one can answer. No one can answer that question. Oh, I'm doing well compared to what? Like living in misery? Living well, in comparison to the guy who works in a factory, the person who has a job that pays a lot less but fulfills them up more than you do. Like, what is that? And so no one can answer this question, especially in the corporate world. No one can. But it is the most important question to answer, strictly for the reason that if you cannot answer that question, you're probably not successful. You're probably not. Because mediocre people, if they believe they're doing well around other mediocre people, this was me as well, you're not doing all that well. You're just not. And so I think I was, and a lot of people are, they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, and they're listening too much to the siren song of, oh, you are making six figures, you are doing this, you are, a top G, you're a baller, you got promoted recently. It's like, okay, fine, cool. Compared to what? Compared to what? Like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Are you doing something that matters? Are you doing well at the staring down the barrel of a gun? Like, what is that? And so no one asks the deep introspective questions because I believe they don't want to, because I think everyone knows this. I think everyone knows this if we're being dead honest about it. So I think that's why a lot of people are really, I would say, apprehensive about leaving. And that's kind of why I left. I kind of felt that kind of creep come into me over time, and that was not a good feeling. And so I was like, okay, I need to probably get out of this, and I did, which is a good decision, I think, at the end of the day. So the second reason is that corporate America is hostile to values, particularly traditional and religious values. And I was getting into this conversation. I was in Dallas a couple weeks ago with my friends Hafiz Bayoku and Stephen Jaworski. We were talking about this, and I thought this is a really interesting conversation. I might do a whole episode on this, about this whole concept of neutrality or finding the middle or moderation when it comes to value-driven conversations across everything about political issues, cultural issues, whatever you want to call them. And over time, and I think this really got clear when I was talking with, Stephen and Hafiz are both very smart people. And so I was talking with the two of them, and I've realized over time that the whole quote-unquote neutral spaces argument is just complete and utter crap. It's nonsense when you look at it. There are no neutral spaces. And I was raised, and my dad believed this, everyone else believed this. It's not my dad's fault, but that's just kind of the narrative that he believed. And I was raised in an area or with a worldview that essentially said, hey, some places are neutral. You cannot talk about X, Y, and Z inside of these places. So for example, in business, what I was told is you cannot talk about politics and religion inside of corporate America. They do not tolerate those conversations. Okay, what about all the pride parades and things that companies do inside of their things? What about, they celebrate Pride Month. Well, what is that? That's an affront to my religion and to my values and to my politics. So they can have that conversation, but I can't. Black History Month, and by the way, I'm a fan of Black History Month, but Black History Month, Martin Luther, like everything, like Women's History Month, like all of these things are taking a value-driven stance. And so really, this is the under-conflict of every conflict. The undercurrent of every conflict is a war of values. And corporate America is no different, by the way. So they are going to fight for their values, by the way, as they should, because no one is neutral when it comes to values. Nobody is neutral when it comes to their values. Let's just start there, and let's move from that point. But I've realized over time, and Tucker Carlson's talked about this, and other people have talked about this, but if people say that they love something, but they say, I want to change everything fundamental about that something, they probably don't love that something. They probably don't. And corporate America is no different. And the reason I realized this is because the second I knew that they hated my values is because they made every point to change them. They drug me into HR meetings. I got yelled at by my superiors. Basically everything in terms of I was singled out multiple times. Literally my first day of work, I was singled out for having an American flag in my background, all that sort of thing. And it made me feel alienated, made me feel isolated, and it made me want to leave because I felt like hardly anyone understood me. Like no one stood up for me. No one said, hey, this is, wrong, and I feel bad about this, whatever. So for anyone, by the way, who's listening to this, who don't drink the neutral spaces Kool-Aid, please. It's just not true. It's just not true because neutral spaces, they just don't exist. No one is ever neutral. No one is neutral. And people are programmed, and people are, definitely drink the Kool-Aid way too much, as I mentioned earlier, and they adopt values, but no one is neutral. No institution is neutral, nor should they be neutral. But one thing I would like is just an honest conversation about that. And corporate America is not willing to have that conversation. No institution is willing to have that conversation. No person is willing to have that conversation. But as value-driven people, I believe that we should have that conversation. And the third thing, speaking of being programmed, ironically, is Andrew Tate gets a lot wrong about a lot of things. It's a lot more wrong than he does right, in my estimation. But one thing, I think the most right thing that Andrew Tate has ever said, nothing to do with women or OnlyFans or dating apps or masculinity or whatever. I think a lot of stuff that he says in that department is stupid. But the one thing that Andrew Tate, I think, gets right more than anything is that the hardest thing you can do in this world that we have constructed today, what he calls the Matrix, and he's not exactly wrong in that either, is to become a free and sovereign person. The hardest thing you can do is to be a free individual, a sovereign person. I like that word a lot better because sovereign means you control your life to a large degree. And you can't control some things, but you control a lot of things that you can control. You can't control the weather. You can't control what God thinks, obviously. But this is the biggest thing that really stuck out to me when I left is that you realize how intertwined and how entangled and how wired that you are to the corporate structure. So you realize how hard it is to escape when you're actually out because your health insurance is tied in there. Your 401k match is tied in there. A lot of people stop investing. The structure of your day, your salary, everything else. And you realize how much you get from your company and how much they are able to pass on to you. And I think honestly, that is probably what scares most people when they're thinking about leaving their job is because of something like that. People aren't afraid to leave because of anything rational, because as we've mentioned throughout this entire segment, we've been talking about this. There is every logical reason to leave your job in many ways for many people. And I'm not saying everyone should leave their job and do what I did. Not a lot. I think most people shouldn't do that, but some people should. But the reason they don't is because of irrationality, of fear. They're afraid. And I was afraid to leave. And I think the most slept on version of that fear is because they know they can't handle their freedom well. They're so used to support from institutions. I remember I was talking to Abigail Schreier about this a couple months ago, and she said a remarkable number of people my age, around mid-20s and old Gen Z, young millennial, those type of folks, are still getting financial assistance from their parents. And I just couldn't believe that. But that's the reality of the situation. Like most people, if they had to be free, if they had to provide for themselves, they had to go out and seek work and develop skills and everything like that, they couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And I think that's a very, very scary thing, but it's a very honest thing. And so if that's you, really do a hard assessment about it. If you're thinking of leaving your job, as I did, think about how you would do, actually, if you had to buy health insurance, if you had to sustain yourself financially, if you had to do everything, like I have to pay my mortgage and do all that kind of thing. How would you do? Ask yourself that question honestly. I don't think a lot of people do. And that's the reason why a lot of people are afraid, because they know they can't handle their freedom, and that's why a lot of people fail to do so and then fail to leave.